Hi, welcome to Scratching the Surface. I'm Jarrett Fuller, and this is my podcast about design criticism and practice. On today's episode, I am talking to the designer, writer, and educator Kenneth FitzGerald. I first came to Kenneth's work through his writing in Emigre, a publication that has come up again and again on this podcast, and I've always really loved not just what he was saying and what he was writing about, but also how he was saying it. His writing always has this distinct voice that really blends insight and humor and criticism that I've always just really enjoyed. Currently, Kenneth is a professor in the graphic design department at Old Dominion University in Virginia and has continued to write on various publications like Speak Up and Design Observer and AIGA. And he's currently on the founding board of Dialectic, which is a great new academic journal put on by AIGA. A lot of his writing was also collected in the book Volume that was released in 2010. In this episode, Kenneth and I talk about how the design discourse has changed over the course of his career, how to connect design writing to other disciplines and areas of study, and how he encourages his students to be interested in writing and critical thinking as it relates to their design practices. I love talking to Kenneth. I'm a big fan of his work and what he does, and just had so much fun in this conversation. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Kenneth FitzGerald. So I've been thinking about this conversation for the last couple of days, knowing we were going to have this, and kind of going back over a lot of your writing. And I realized as I was preparing for this that I've been reading your work for years, but I actually only know you as a writer. And I feel like that is a bit of a disservice to everything that you do. And so I was curious, I want to kind of just start a little bit with your background and kind of what came first for you. Was it design or was it writing, and how did those things come together?
Well, it's like only in the past month have I started showing people any kind of comprehensive look at what I do.
Okay.
Like the things I do in art. I mean, I just created a Tumblr page, and you can go there and see a selection of stuff. And part of it is just laziness of sort, but another part of it was kind of deliberately suppressing it, because certainly with design writing and criticism, the first thing people want to know or comes out of their mouths about something you might have written or some issue is, well, what has that person done?
Right.
The assumption is, well, that person's a designer. I mean, that's going to be the best critic of a designer. And so if anything, I was like hiding it, saying, no, I want you to read this. I want you to address these issues. And I'll tell you some things about what my background is. And if anything, just to incite things more of trying to sound like I'm not the kind of person who's supposed to be saying this stuff.
Interesting.
And so you've really got to, I really insist you address these issues on their merits or lack of it, rather than referring to the work I did. And certainly what we see is, oh, well, this person is very well known. They're very, as a designer. And so therefore we're going to give their opinions a lot of value. Mm-hmm. Well, there is an argument there, but sorry, I read a lot of lame arguments by very well-known designers.
Yeah.
But they're, oh, well, this is X person, and so therefore it's gossip.
Yeah.
So now I sort of feel that, well, now it's a good time in the game to start saying, well, this is what I do.
Yeah.
And let's see how it goes, because I can say long before I got into design, during my fine art career, people would get to know me before they saw my work.
Right.
And it was very frequent that the response would be, wow, I didn't know, I just didn't think you did this.
Right.
Or would be doing this sort of thing. And there would be like a a reappraisal
Hmm.
about me afterwards, usually for the better, I like to think.
Yeah.
So, so that's why. I mean,
Yeah.
there isn't much. There are some things, but it was really, I'm not, foregrounding it.
Yeah.
And so, really, I went to graduate school for design, very pragmatically or practically,
Okay.
where my undergraduate degree is in ceramics, and
Oh.
my interest in design was I loved album covers,
Mm.
and I'd love to do that. But I looked into design, and I knew design students when I was an undergraduate, and it was like, wow, this exciting thing. Designers make it boring, and so,
Huh. Yeah.
no, thank you. And then I encountered Emigre magazine,
Okay.
and naively thought, oh wow, there's a place for somebody who thinks like me here. They're talking about design in a way that's interesting finally, and so I went to graduate school, but really it was pragmatic. My thought was, boy, I'd like to become a university's publications director.
Okay.
And before that, I had just done scattered freelance things, because how hard is design?
Right.
And and but it was when I was in graduate school. My thesis advisor, I was the only designer he had ever been the advisor for.
Mm.
He now runs the Mass Art graduate program, and George Creamer, and his background was, I mean, he was an artist, but also criticism and writing.
Okay.
And I was interested in reading that. I was reading Emigre and related things, so I understood what people were taught. I wanted to understand what people were talking about. And sort of halfway through my thesis year, one day I'm talking with George, and he breaks it to me, says, I have to tell you, you're an academic. It's like, no, I want to go. I want to make things. He said,
Yeah.
no, you really have to. And
Huh.
it really then, so my thesis went from designing the first issue of my magazine, which I eventually did, to a study of contemporary design writing, because I was reading it anyway.
Hmm.
And so I sort of charted it. That became my thesis.
Wow.
And the first day of my graduate study, actually, the head of the program, Al Gowan, who's a writer and researcher about design also, the first day, he knew that I was on the Alumni Association board, and I wrote and edited for the alumni publication. So he said,
Okay.
well, I know you write, and I write also. I challenge you, before you graduate, to actually have something published
Mm.
of design. And that was like nowhere
Huh.
on my agenda. I had some scrapes with it, where one thing I did before I started graduate school is an alumni project by a design graduate, and putting on a show of mass art design alumni. And two of them were Jacqueline Casey
Okay.
and Muriel Cooper. And
Interesting.
since I was writing for the alumni publication, they asked, well, why don't you write an article about some of the people who are going to be in the show? Here's Muriel Cooper's phone number. Why don't you call?
Yeah.
And I don't know who this person is. And so I look and find Liz McQuiston's, Women in Graphic
Hmm.
Design, and I read the blurb there, and I call Muriel Cooper, and who's really sweet and patient with this dope who knows nothing about design and who she is. This is 1988,
Okay.
around this. And so that was my extent of design. And I met Jacqueline Casey, who came to the opening for the exhibition. So even then, even when I'm given this challenge by Al to do this, I have no idea
Yeah.
what, it just never. And then it happened where I was in the midst of writing the thesis. And this is exactly true. what I do to warm up still to, I know I'm going to write something serious.
Mm-hmm.
What I do to warm up is write something sort of frivolous, and it also is a delaying tactic of sorts.
Okay.
Well, I'll do that.
I like that.
So I'm writing the thesis or parts of it, or before I start, I say, well, I'm going to write a letter to the editor to Emigre, and which I do, and it's kind of a response to something Michael Beirut wrote, which I
Okay.
thought was fun. Which was fun, but I said, well, I'm going to do the other. I'm going to show the other side of it. So I write it and I send it off, and I forget I did it, because I'm writing the thesis.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I'm sitting at the computer getting the cats out of the way, and the phone rings, and there's this voice that says, "Hi, this is Rudy from Emigre." And I, now up until this point, the only person I dealt with at Emigre was I forget his last name, Tim Starback,
Okay.
who was their manager for a while. And for some reason, I would have to call to give them my credit card number to be able to subscribe.
Yeah.
So that's what's on my mind. So I answer the phone and I hear this and I think that it's him. And my thought is what anybody would think. He's cold calling me to try and sell me typefaces. And so part of my brain is saying, how do I politely say, I love your stuff, but I can't afford it? And then the other part of my brain says, no, you dope. He said, Rudy. That's the editor. And so I caught up when he'd been talking.
Wow.
So I with it. And he says, we got your thing and we're going to publish it. And he really liked it. He said, Michael Beirut's a friend, but we really, like this. And we chat. He asked me, who I am and what I'm doing. And then he says, have you heard about this Elliot Earls project? Throwing apples at the sun, which I had and was really interested in, but can I spend $100 when I'm finishing graduate school?
Yeah.
And he says, well, if you're interested, we'll send you a copy and we'd like you to review it.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, of course, I immediately say, well, sure. And I have absolutely no clue what I'm going to do or how I'm going to, design criticism? I don't know what this is. And, and also the deadline is just a little bit before my thesis is due.
Right.
You're writing simultaneously. And so my thesis suffered for it. I mean, the actual document, it's pretty, I look at it now and, wince.
Mm-hmm.
And probably I know other people could say, yes, we read your first thing there, which Rudy published, and it's that should make you wince also. But that's how I started it. And the really weird thing was, after I get off the phone with Rudy, I said, well, that's really great. That's really interesting and scary some. But what had been happening, I'd been so involved in the thesis that I was literally having dreams where I'm arguing with Steve Heller.
Wow. Okay.
And so I hang up the phone and I start to wonder, wait a minute, did that just happen?
Yeah.
Am I sort of in a waking dream? And so Rudy said I'll send you a letter and solidify all the details of it. And so I'm waiting for this to make sure this actually happened, that this person called me, that I wasn't just, fantasizing.
Right.
So, which it was. And so that was my start. I just sort of, from a standing stop.
Yeah.
From his generosity of inviting me to do that based on this letter to the editor. And then I do that. And he asked me for a blurb about myself, and I put on it that I'm producing this magazine. I'm going to do the thing I intended to do. And he said, well, what's that all about? And I said, well, this is what it is. He says, it just so happens our next issue we're going to do magazines, and we're going to ask a number of people to write about their favorite magazine. So how about you doing that?
Wow.
And I said, oh, sure, I'll do that. And so for the first few, it was exactly like that. I said, well, that was fun. and that's the last thing I'll ever do. So, oh, there's two things. And it just became him asking me, and I did have some ideas. And it was like each one, well, this will be the last thing, until it just starts, piling up. And so that's the unglamorous, undirected story. Suddenly, wait a minute, I'm doing this now.
Yeah.
This is something I'm doing. So I might as well. Well, I really didn't change my attitude any. I'll just keep. It seems to be working.
Yeah.
I'm getting certain people upset, and that's good, I guess. And other people seem to like it, and at least Rudy does, and that's the main thing, I suppose. So that's the true story.
I that's so interesting to me on a lot of different levels, and I have so many questions that I kind of want to pull out of that a little bit. So were you thinking kind of at the time, and as Rudy kept asking you for things, that like you have that he's asking you to do things, and you have your advisor who said that you're an academic.
Yeah.
What were you thinking about kind of both of those things happening at the time, and you're finishing school with what I assume was thinking that you were going to become a graphic designer, and now you're kind of doing this other kind of writing about it? What was that kind of thought process like for you at the time?
Well, what happened at the end of graduate school, because of this and being told this, and I liked it. I mean, in one way or another, I wanted to be in the university atmosphere because I like that and knowledge. So it was just, what kind of position would I be? And it's sort of like, well, I really like more the idea of really purely dealing with the ideas of sorts. And so when I got out of graduate school, I was simultaneously looking for the working job, and also for teaching positions. And I got offered one of each, and I decided to do the academic side. But as far as the writing, it was really when I had to figure out what is it I want to do. In some ways, it was like, well, I'm just going to do this. I'm not going to think about it too hard.
Right.
And I wanted to have, I up to that point also read a lot of art criticism and art theory, and certainly had an intense dose of it in graduate school. And I really wanted to, and this crosses everything that I do, I really wanted to be somewhere with the writing that had the rigor of academic writing,
right?
Which I really admire, but would be, is really hard for me to do. I know I can do it, but I wanted to have that rigor, but also have the accessibility that more, Rick Poynter talks about critical journalism. I'm probably using the term wrong. And that's how I feel. Well, in some ways, that's naturally what comes out of me. But it was also quite deliberately thinking, I want to make these ideas accessible, and it has to have the personal voice to it, which is usually, I don't like when that's like purged from it, but I also don't like when it's, and certainly in design writing, and certainly at that point, it was almost overwhelmingly personality driven.
Right.
And where's the rigor? Where's at least some kind of proof for what you're saying? And it was always, again, referring back to someone's resume. Oh, this is my evidence for my claim. I was art director for this, I guess so.
Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting to me that your kind of first really introduction to design, or your first connections to the design field, were rooted in theory and kind of reading about design and really kind of approaching it from an academic side. Do you think that background had an influence on the type of writing that you were doing, the type of writing you wanted to do, the type of design work that you were drawn to and wanted to write about?
It did, because I wanted that rigor.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I thought, why I asked George Creamer to be my thesis advisor,
Oh, okay.
because he wrote art criticism.
Hmm.
And I wanted to make sure if I did this, and well, first of all, I wasn't thinking I was going to be doing it when I was in graduate school. I mean, it was just totally focused on that thesis
Yeah.
and response to the things I was reading. I wanted there to be rigor to my ideas, that what I read, I wanted to apply what I thought was missing in the overwhelming majority of design writing. It just wasn't there.
Hmm.
And I wanted to put it there. I wanted to make sure what I had, while at the same time, what I think is good about design, and I mean, this is very rough in general, as opposed to art criticism and fine art, is that it is an accessible medium.
Yeah.
And that is a good thing. And design has all of this rhetoric that influences meaning.
Hmm.
And which put me in some interesting spots in graduate school where, for the seminar class, when we're all asked, well, write a statement. Well, I not only wrote a statement, I designed it.
Mm.
And I hand it in, and the response is, well, this is very good, but it's not in the proper form, which is, it should be in 12-point Helvetica. It shouldn't be in three different typeface with these three different statements that, interlock and
Right.
all this. And it's like, your comment just negated my entire graduate. One of the central premises that design,
Yeah.
brings rhetoric. There's this rhetorical form. So, oh well.
What was it about, but what was it about the kind of, you said that you were really interested in the ideas around graphic design and that's kind of why you wanted to find a job at the university. And so I'm curious, like, what was it about that? Was it this idea that that graphic design is accessible and the forms of graphic design carry with them all this meaning, and you weren't finding people who were talking about it?
Well, it certainly was, and that was largely what Emigre,
Right.
the major assault on modernism,
Hmm.
and that was so furious in the early '90s. And for me, it wasn't an intellectual thing. I just read these things, and it just like automatically made sense. It's like, well,
Mm.
of course.
Yeah.
And then I have to learn about modernism and all of these other things. It's like, oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
I was just honestly just feeling it. It just made sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to talk about Emigre a little bit and kind of the culture that came out of and was a part of, because I'm pretty sure it was through reading Emigre that I kind of first discovered you and your work. But as I mentioned to you earlier, I kind of came to design in the early 2000s and felt, as a high school student who was kind of just discovering this stuff and picking up old copies of Emigre, felt like I had just missed this kind of very interesting critical discourse around graphic design in the 90s. And part of me wonders if I am looking at that era with kind of a certain romance that might not really be there. And so I was curious, I kind of just want to hear your perspective on graphic design in the 90s and specifically the kind of critical discourse that really blossomed in that decade that in a lot of ways we kind of don't have right now.
Um, if I'm not careful, I could get romantic about it, but certainly it was. There was so many. It's sort of like it was like back when I was 16 when the Sex Pistols album came out. I mean, the new wave era where something exciting and different was happening all over the place. There was just so much of this happening, and that's what this time was. I was very, very incredibly fortunate to get involved at
Yeah.
that time where just ideas and interesting work, left and right, just everywhere. It's just coming at you. And I'm pretty sure it was Rick Porter who said, and that every issue of Emigre was like an event. I mean, it
Yeah.
felt that way for me, even though, and I was coming from a different, different place. I had a different take on it, but still it was an event. It was exciting. It was like I was going to be introduced to something else really fascinating,
Yeah.
some idea, some argument, some kind of, work, and how it looked. So, and then I got involved, and those became the least interesting issues for me, because
Right.
it's like the other ones are more exciting. Um, well, there was interesting stuff along with what I was in, but it really was. There was just so much, discussion. And when it was over, or as it went on, I certainly learned more about history
Hmm.
of graphic design and what went on, and realized how rare it was in that sort of context.
Yeah.
But for me, it's just like very immediate. There was just all of this interesting stuff. A lot of ideas and work was being allowed. People were just trying a lot of different things. And a lot of it didn't work. Some of it was dead end, but just so much stuff was happening. And then it sort of kind of became the revenge of the mainstream, or the revenge of the pragmatic
Right.
design.
Right.
It's like, well, that was fun. Now let's get back to business.
Yeah.
And it's more complicated than that.
Right. Of course.
I don't, I do not sit around being, nostalgic.
Okay.
It's in any ways. I mean, in some ways it's so personal. When Rudy said he didn't want to do it anymore, it was like, hey, I get you. I
Yeah.
mean, it's time to move on. It's time to do something else. I miss that form. I miss getting that thing, but that means new things are going to happen, and some sort of new challenge, even though I knew practically that, well, there goes my forum. Who else
Right.
is going to put up with this stuff? And certainly not very few, not many people.
Yeah.
And and by me, well, that's neither, here nor there. I'm not owed an audience by any means. And what happens, happens. And I've always been sort of unplanned. I do what I do,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
okay, time for something else, or this changes, and if I stop doing it, well, but I still haven't managed to.
Yeah.
There's always been some other thing that keeps me at it.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. Is I was curious because I feel like even though Emigre is no more, and even though that kind of I don't even know the word, that kind of vibrancy around critical theory and writing about design from that era largely isn't here anymore. You keep writing, and there's still, you still are finding forums, and so I have a kind of this is a two-part question really. I'm curious of how the discourse around graphic design has changed since then, and then kind of how you're thinking about the work that you do and how it's changing kind of along with that, and the things you're writing about and things like that.
Um, well, there just simply isn't that much, discussion, because there isn't such a visible forum or forums
Mm-hmm.
for it, that there just isn't consideration about doing it.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where,
Mm.
and to a large degree, I'm not one for shoulds, which is a moral argument. I'm one about, okay, well, that's how it is. The marketplace has decided.
Right.
This is how it is, and it's the design marketplace, which is, sorry, we're not interested in that. And my response is, okay, on a personal level,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, nobody owes me. I mean, an audience, or to read me for any reason whatsoever. I mean, there's no obligation in any case. Just because I deign to write this stuff that somebody should, design should look at it and pay attention to it. No.
Right.
I do it because
Yeah.
I do it, and that's it. It does get tricky, though, when the many people in the graphic design field say, why aren't we taken seriously? Why aren't we given this stature for the kind of thought and the kind of work we do? What's up with that? And I say, well, if you want that, you've got to be doing and supporting this. Not for me, but for you. I'm not Massimo Vignelli writing the call for criticism.
Right.
He wrote that, and it's all these designers saying, wow, thank you, Massimo, for writing this. Yes, this, that, and the other thing. Well, I'm just pointing out the fact you asked for this and you're not doing it.
Yeah.
So this is what you get, and as far, and again, on the personal level, it doesn't equal loving me in any way. That's your argument. If you don't want, if you want something different, do something different. That's just how it is.
Yeah, you've hit on so many things that that come up when I'm talking to people for these, because I feel like something that I'm very conscious of is I don't want this podcast and my project and my discussions with people to come across as, why isn't there more criticism? We need more people talking about design, because I actually think that there are more people talking about design today than probably ever before, and design in a very large sense is kind of in the public consciousness. But what I'm interested in is, how do we talk about it at a rigorous level that goes deeper than just kind of voting up or down on the latest company redesign logo, which also, that has value also, but there's a lot more to this thing that we're doing. So I don't know if that was a question other than just confirming that I agree with what you said. So I guess kind of where I was getting at with that, though, is something that was always interesting to me about Emigre, and you kind of echoed this sentiment just now, is there was a decent amount of Emigre that was also about the importance of criticism, the importance of this discourse. And so I'm curious, what is the value that you see? How does this help? How does having a critical discourse around graphic design help the profession, both at large and then kind of, in individual practices?
I have no interest in helping the profession.
Okay.
Not on the agenda, at all. I mean, if practitioners need me, oh my God, there are bigger problems there.
Well, yeah, maybe
I can talk about what it means to me.
Yeah.
Why I'm interested in reading it and how it influences my life and makes it much more exciting and interesting to look at design, to look at art, because I'm entertaining these ideas. It goes so broadly. It's, it transcends just of the doing design. It's not a recipe or trying to develop one about how to make design per se. It's about understanding what it's like to be conscious and to create a culture, to have a culture.
Right.
And here is an activity, a discipline of design, which is so prevalent and so central to this culture. And it just engages all different kinds of ideas. It just intersects with so many aspects of it. And it's just fascinating. It just makes the world much more fascinating for me to engage in these things. And so I know many designers, now, and who have no use for what I do. They still respect me. and I respect them. But really, what I do and write doesn't really affect them, and that's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right with it. Again, I can talk about what it means to me, and I can talk about the rhetoric that the design field has put up about, again, the call for criticism stuff. But that's what it is for me. It's just design is very important to me because I just spontaneously love this form and these things here, and I love contemplating the ideas. I'm conscious, and I like just knowing how all this stuff fits together and the possibilities that it opens up about how I'm going to make my life more interesting and to be more interested in what is there now. And but the profession, good luck. I hope all of my design friends, I want them to make money.
Yeah.
I want them to do well because I love them and want them to be successful. But the writing isn't a component of helping or hindering. Honestly, not the hindering.
Right.
It's not meant to do that.
Well, I think, see, I really like what you're saying. What you're saying is helping me parse out something that I've been thinking about a lot. And I feel like is a lot of the reasons why I'm even doing this is because, and I apologize, I'm kind of thinking out loud now, but you've struck something in me that I hadn't connected yet, or connected before, is that I think I'm very similar to you in that I'm interested in reading about design and thinking about design in my own writing about design from a critical and theoretical perspective. And it was always just for, kind of my personal enjoyment and my personal understanding. And it made me appreciate these things more deeply or in a new way. And there was something in me that felt like that had to have some sort of purpose beyond that. It had to be this thing that, the profession could get around, or it would make us better designers or something. And I feel like kind of you're saying like, maybe just for enjoyment and just for kind of a deeper understanding, maybe that's enough.
I firmly believe with a lot of things, you can't go directly at it. The way to get to a purpose is to do it tangentially. And many of the ideas and circumstances of my life have not come through, directly doing it. As I described how I got into this, it was just like, what? Just this series of fortunate occurrences.
Right.
And I think it can inform exactly, what you do. I just have a hard time making giant, encompassing statements, about shoulds. I can talk about what I do. And I believe that, very primarily, you've got to know why you're doing something for yourself.
Right.
And that's what gets you through the times when nobody knows who you are, or that they know who you are and can't make heads or tails out of what it is you do.
Yeah.
And then once you become, you do get some attention, that keeps you honest, where you don't do things for other people. You're not trying to fulfill somebody else's idea of what it is you should be doing and what you should, sound like. And for me, all through this, I do it because I enjoy doing it. And if anything, perversely, nobody wants to read this kind of stuff. Well, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
I'm going to keep doing it because it is so unpopular.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I reread in preparing for this, I reread your essay that was in Emigre. I think it was called Quietude, which I was kind of, I'm sorry to like bring up something that was probably, 10 years old now, but that's kind of what you talk about is that, there might not be a space for this and maybe that's okay. It's okay if kind of people don't understand this, but it is a shame because graphic design is this thing that we're surrounded by all the time. So I'm curious, because you also are a teacher, and I'm curious how you kind of take this kind of way of thinking about design, and how do you kind of translate that to students, or how do you think about teaching graphic design to students?
Very, very carefully. Because so much of what students' expectations of and how many people still teach it is very pragmatic.
Right.
And it's very weird for me is, well, there are portfolio schools out there or just doing it. Do that, go that route if you can't stand these ideas or these underpinnings of it. So it's kind of like, and so there's a certain percentage of students who just totally reject, anything like this. What the hell are you talking about?
Right.
You are wasting my time. I want to get to work on a brochure, please.
Right.
And again, well, it's like, all right, I'm good with that, but why are you here? I mean, this is, don't you know what higher education is or, aspires to be?
Yeah.
You're just, however, there are other people who are teaching it in that very pragmatic sort of sense. So it's kind of can't blame the student with that. I just I think any idea you have to be careful about. I just introduce, certain readings at times. I just talk, and over the years, just try and talk better and describe where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
And I like to think that it all dovetails together, that these abstract ideas I'm talking about will make somebody a better designer. What I tell students is, figure this out for yourself, which is what I did. Who's considered at the top of the field? Let's go take a look at the people who are, widely honored. Yeah. I'll pull out, since I mentioned him before, Michael Beirut, someone who writes extremely well, who's incredibly intelligent, who's invested in sort of like these ideas.
Right.
And I looked at other people. Okay, right next to him, there at Pentagram is Paula Scher. She doesn't write as much as he does, but she's incredibly erudite and speaks about design in a much broader context. And very interestingly, crosses it with practicality. It's right in there, and I like to do that also. So I say in my survey, I'm seeing these people who are top of the field who aren't talking, really are talking about design at a much higher level. Don't take my word for it. Go out and see it. And for me, that's the evidence. That's what's, happening. So I make a point of that, of, introducing various designers, and, some students get it, some students don't, somewhere in between. It's a cliche of a long time, education is you're teaching for the future.
Right.
Right. I saw that. It took me years for certain things to make sense. In a lot of ways, I think what I'm trying to teach in the ideas are very, very practical and pragmatic. Something that I think about intently all the time. There simply aren't enough design seats available for all the design graduates we're turning out. I mean, there just isn't.
Yeah.
And so many of the overwhelming majority of people aren't going to go into this, doing graphic design every day. It'll be, most of them are in the periphery or surrounded in that. So that's the reality of the situation. What am I really teaching? What do I need to do? And for me, I can't be so laser beam focused on how to make a good brochure.
Right.
Tools and ideas and sensibilities that will carry over. And again, my feeling is, when you look at it, hey, actually, that's the best thing for the hardcore design students also, if they can crack open,
Right.
find a little bit and realize, hey, this is school. This is the time where I can investigate these things and just be open-minded about stuff.
So I have just a couple more questions just to kind of start to wrap it up a little bit. But I'm curious, what are kind of like I don't know the word exactly, the issues or the topics that you think kind of design writers and the design profession should be kind of thinking about and talking about? Like, what are the things that are under theorized right now that we should be talking about?
I think, first of all, keep making wider connections and just keep connecting design to other disciplines, other ideas of thought. There are some that are over connected. Oh, please stop talking about architecture.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm guilty of that.
And certain other things. Me, it's like why I am just boring everybody by talking about music all the time, of making that connection.
Yeah.
Where something like that, combining with other disciplines, that's very interesting. Means something that sticks in my mind. Two of my favorite musicians, and they're both guitar players, Richard Thompson and Robert Fripp.
Okay.
They get interviewed and they're asked, well, what guitar players do you listen to? And they say, well, I don't listen to guitar players. I listen to other musicians.
Right.
And see what they do and bring that sensibility to, my instrument. I know Thompson definitely talked about that. And I think that way with design. I love hearing designers talk about design. But how about crossing that?
Yeah.
How about really, looking at it in that other context? Really get design out there, and the design profession just keeps turning inward, just saying, nope, only we can talk about our, what we do. No, get out there and explore those commonalities. Too much of the design, well, not criticism, but design writing, well, criticism too, it sort of ends up being in the service of making better design. And again, I don't think it can be so direct, that it's got to be just get out there and make really bizarre connections or unlikely things. Explore that.
Right.
Just drop the idea of we're trying to make better design. It's not, again, it's not my job to get Pentagram or anybody else more work.
Right.
They do not need me helping them.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it still comes down to that. We're trying to increase appreciation so more designers can get work. Huh? That is, again, boy, you're in desperate straits if you need my help.
Right.
And I think it just creeps in. It is just, it's been the emphasis for so long. So maybe it's not particular fields, but it's the attitude about what it is you're doing and being very careful about that. Again, I don't want to say that it's not important or not valid. I mean, people are doing amazing, interesting work with that attitude, doing, research. I know them and envy and admire their dedication and what they do. But for me, that's just it. It's like obviously it's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to push out into other areas and make those connections and sow the commonalities. And I wish other people would do more of that too.
I love that. I know I said I had like a couple more. I have one question. I'm adding in a question based on that answer. I'm curious kind of how you think about your readers. I don't want to use the word audience, but the people, when you publish something, the person who's reading it, what do you want them? Do you want them to kind of see design in a new way, to see what they're doing in a new way, to make a connection they haven't made before? or kind of like what is your goal in putting your writing into the world?
The first thing is always that somebody enjoyed reading it.
Yeah,
Period. That is absolutely the number one.
that's a great answer.
And that is the real answer. And it comes from my culture writing ultimate hero. Again, people are tired of hearing this from me, Lester Bangs,
Oh,
where I can sit down and read a record review from how many years ago,
yeah,
and I read it for the joy of the language and the ideas. They're some of all of it. I want people to do that with me. It's like somebody says, I don't really care that much about design anymore, any more than I did before. It would be nice, but I really just loved reading it.
yeah,
So that is absolutely the first thing, and I think is necessary for somebody to entertain those ideas. And so after that, because I'm doing this because design matters to me, I love talking about it, I love thinking about it, love doing it.
yeah,
Then it's like, yes, I would like someone to come away saying, I never thought about that. And not so much, definitely I would like them to appreciate design because I do. It makes potentially, wow, here's somebody else I can talk to
yeah,
about this thing I love. I'm trying to create this network of people. But along with that, maybe a little after that, is they start thinking about the world in a different way. Look at things that, wow, I appreciated that. It's sort of how some art made me appreciate stains on the sidewalk and look at it in a different way.
Right.
The same sort of thing is I would love my stuff that people say, my world is now much more interesting to consider. Stuff that I just passed by, I now look at and say, life is rich.
Yeah.
You know?
I love that. I mean, that's so great. I almost want to just end it there because that's such a great answer. I do have one more question. I'm curious, who are the writers that you already mentioned Lester Bangs, but who are the writers that you are enjoying a lot right now, both about design but also not about design, that you think are kind of doing that type of work that you're talking about?
Well, certainly I want to say as far as design, one thing I was fortunate when I got into it, there were so many interesting people writing about it where I learned a great deal, starting with Rudy, who is appreciated for, for what he does. But you name, the person who's respected for it. And I owe a debt, to them all. And I'll read anything. In the larger, sense, and this is especially on my mind for other reasons, it's sort of a book I recommend to everybody, particularly who's thinking about, doing this sort of thing is, there's Lester Bangs, definitely. Annie Dillard, her book, Living by Fiction, is just magnificent. I wasn't able to read until I read that book. I tried to read Thomas Pynchon and could not deal with it. Then I read her book and it was like, I got it.
Interesting.
And what she does in that book is uses metaphor, connects fiction with art, talks about writing, and first of all, as just somebody who loves to read.
Yeah.
And so for me, there again is this combination of there's this rigor. I mean, rigorously thinking of, working your idea out, and then just the joy, not just the joy of language, of making those, those words sing. And those are major. In some ways, I'd say I'm the, the bastard child of those two. You've managed to put those two together, and you kind of get me. They're the major things.
That's great.
I don't know, that's sort of what you were asking.
That's great. And I have not read that book, so I'm gonna add it to the list.
Yeah. And what I love about it, there are parts about it I just read and go, no, and you just don't, just go. While other times it's just like, oh my God.
Oh wow.
It's, just wonderful.
This has been so great. I'm not just saying this because we're talking. You really are one of my favorite. I'm putting this in quotes, design writers. I've been reading you for years, and talking to you has helped me make a lot of connections and help me connect some of the things I was thinking about in new ways. And so I really appreciate your time and this conversation. I'm so glad that we got to do this. So thank you so much.
Well, no, thank you. I'm flattered to be talked to. I appreciate it. I'm glad I'm, contributing that, because that's sort of this, even in this age of blogs and all these things, you send these ideas, these words out in public. With Emigre back in those days, you wait 3 months and see if somebody wrote.
Yeah.
And you don't know. And it's nice to know a fan.
Yeah. Yes.
That is a connection. So, thank you. It is just, really gratifying to know that, hey, this is being meaningful to somebody else.
Yeah.
Because, again, to go back to what I hope for it, another thing, I suppose it's kind of like a tripod, that somebody says, I want to make something.
Right.
Not even, I want to make something. I want to contribute something, either by writing something else or making something to bring something else worthwhile, into being. Wow. That's why I teach, I'm there because I want to experience new stuff. I want to see what's coming and help facilitate it.
Right.
So thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to make the time for that.
Yeah, I mean it. It's This episode was recorded on April 13th, 2017. Our theme music is by Andy Borgasani. We're on Twitter and Instagram at Surface Podcast. You can find us on iTunes and SoundCloud and at scratchingthesurface.fm. Thanks for listening.